Bethesda's Starfield has been out for almost a week now, so I thought this would be a perfect time to detail some of my early impressions of the game in my first 5 hours of gameplay. A quick heads up before I start talking about the game is that this video will contain some early game spoilers, so if you want to avoid anything from about the first 5 hours of gameplay, then now's your time to click off. So let's waste no time and jump into the things that I think are a great positive early sign for Starfield. And to me, there's no better place to start than this simply awe-inspiring world that Bethesda have created. I mean, it truly is incredible that there's this many planets and galaxies in this world. I mean, yes, I know that so many of these planets and galaxies will have very empty, barren wastelands, but it still creates this feeling where you want to go explore to the far end of the galaxy to see what's really out there. And that for me was something Bethesda had to nail, because if we look at our own experience here on Earth, we'll find ourselves looking up at the stars wondering what's really out there, and for a space game, you have to get that right. And that for me is something Bethesda definitely have got right early on. I have landed on random locations on some of the planets, and I'll be honest, there isn't tons of stuff to do, but I think there's enough there for the gameplay loop Bethesda is going for here. They want you to go to these key areas, such as New Atlantis. Whereas when you land on these random other locations on planets, I think you're more there to survey the wildlife, collect some materials, and build a base, and that for me is something completely different to the main story of the game, and it's a nice little side thing you can do. I will be honest though, would I rather have less planets if that meant the select ones in the game had more things on them and were more concentrated? Well, yes. But at least in my early time playing, I can kind of see what Bethesda are going for here, with that sense of endless exploration, and to me it is a captivating experience. The areas that are well concentrated, like New Atlantis, or the museum that I found on the Moon Titan, are really interesting and cool. I spent a good 10-20 minutes in that said museum. This wasn't for any kind of quest, just simply so I could see what was there, and it's something that had me intrigued enough to keep me off the main quest line, just by putting a simple location on the moon of Saturn. Something that a game like Fallout 76 really lacked for me was that classic Bethesda charm. The fun characters and quest lines is something that allows us to get lost in these classic Bethesda games, but in Fallout 76 for me that just wasn't there. Going from planet to planet, from city to town in Starfield, I've seen so many weird and wonderful characters, and you can interact with all of them. It makes the game feel alive, as all of these people are going about their own ways, and you're just crossing their paths. It's intriguing to see how they interact with the fact they are in space, and are no longer enclosed by Earth, and Bethesda did a good job at conveying the emotion of these people and the new planets they inhabit. A lot of these people you can also hire to your crew, or put on a base that you've crafted, and when you speak to them you get a sense of their personality and whether they'd be a good fit on your crew. I can see hours of potential in not only this, but also the crafting of the ships and the bases. Which again is something on the side, much like the base building in a game like Fallout 4 or the house building in a game like Skyrim. So overall, there is a lot of positive signs with Starfield. And these are all things that I've thoroughly enjoyed so far exploring in my first 5 hours of gameplay. But I'd be lying if I said that Bethesda have been able to craft a perfect game here with Starfield. And there are some shortcomings which we must talk about here. Firstly, and probably one of the things I was most worried about when going into this game, is the fact that it runs at only 30 frames per second. Listen, 30 frames per second is playable, and it isn't something that's completely put me off the game. But at the same time, I can't deny that it is difficult moving from games that run at a smooth 60 or 120 frames per second. It limits the smoothness of the world, and it makes the game feel slightly dated. I can't help but imagine as well that this locked frame rate has something to do with the large amounts of planets. Which, at the end of the day, I would have rather them toned down on the planets if that meant we were able to get at least 60 frames. Other than that though, performance-wise the game has been better than I expected. I've only had one crash so far, and I haven't encountered any potential game-breaking bugs or glitches, and rather just small ones that Bethesda games seem to always be unable to avoid. But moving towards the gameplay side of things, and instantly something I noticed was a disappointing enemy AI in combat. The combat is probably Bethesda's worst, with some really boring weapons and unsatisfying animations. That to me just does not reach the heights seen in previous titles. It's a shame that, from what I've seen so far, Bethesda haven't been able to craft a new and interesting combat system here. The enemy AI seems to lack any sense. And from what I've seen so far, they don't use the environment and locations they're in to their advantage. And this becomes quite frustrating to fight at times. A lot of the enemies just kind of stand still and shoot back, and that to me just isn't interesting enough. One last little complaint that I have, and something I'll make a short mention of, is some of the facial animations. And don't get me wrong, it's not Mass Effect Andromeda bad, but I can certainly see the difference between the main characters and the side characters in this aspect, as a lot less attention was put into some of the random characters that appear. These are just my very early impressions though, and I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But just try not to spoil too much of the game in there. This game has loads more to offer that I haven't even seen yet, and lots of mechanics that will be way more in depth the further I get, so my opinion is bound to change. I have enjoyed my first 5 hours of this game though, and it's certainly exceeded my expectations so far. I hope the rest of my experience is just as fun. Do expect to see a review from me at some point in the coming months, when I finally get round to putting tens of hours into this really promising game.